March 2019, police in Athens, Georgia responded to what seemed like a routine burglary call. A young man reported that someone had broken into his home and stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of cryptocurrency. But when investigators arrived at the scene, they had no idea they were about to crack one of the largest cryptocurrency heists in history. What they found inside that house would lead them to a secret that had been hidden for almost a decade, a secret worth over $3 billion. The hacker who stole $1 billion in Bitcoin. To understand the story, we need to go back to 2011. The internet was a very different place. Facebook was only 7 years old. Instagram had just launched. And in the darkest corners of the web, something revolutionary was being born. The Silk Road. Named after the ancient trade route, this wasn't your typical website. It was a hidden marketplace, accessible only through special browsers that concealed your identity. And it sold everything illegal you could imagine. Drugs, fake IDs, hacking tools. If it was illegal, you could probably buy it on Silk Road. But here's what made it truly revolutionary. It only accepted one form of payment: Bitcoin. In 2011, Bitcoin was still a curiosity. Most people had never heard of it. A single Bitcoin was worth less than $1. But for Silk Road's creator, a man who called himself Dread Pirate Roberts, Bitcoin was perfect. It was anonymous. It was untraceable. Or so he thought. By 2012, Silk Road was doing millions of dollars in illegal transactions every month. Bitcoin was flowing through the system like water. Users deposited their Bitcoin into Silk Road accounts, bought whatever they wanted, and sellers withdrew their profits. It seemed like the perfect crime. Anonymous buyers, anonymous sellers, and millions of dollars in Bitcoin changing hands every day. But someone was watching, and they saw an opportunity. September 2012. While most people were worried about the upcoming presidential election or what new iPhone to buy, a young man named Zhong was about to pull off one of the most audacious heists in history. Jimmy wasn't your stereotypical hacker. He was a University of Georgia student, bright but unremarkable. He lived a comfortable life in Athens, Georgia, a typical college town where the biggest crimes were usually party-related. But Jimmy had discovered something. A vulnerability. A crack in Silk Road system. Here's how it worked. When users deposited Bitcoin into their Silk Road accounts, there was a brief window, just seconds, where the system could be tricked. If you created multiple accounts and triggered withdrawals at exactly the right moment, in rapid succession, the system would pay out more Bitcoin than you actually deposited. It was like finding a glitch in an ATM that gave you $1,000 every time you deposited 10. On September 19, 2012, Zhong made his move. He created 9 different Silk Road accounts, each one carefully designed to hide his identity. Then, in a coordinated attack that lasted just minutes, he triggered over 140 transactions in rapid-fire succession. The system couldn't keep up. It was like a slot machine that had been hacked to always pay out jackpots. Transaction after transaction, Bitcoin poured into Jimmy's accounts. When the dust settled, Zhong had stolen 51,680 Bitcoins. At the time, that was worth about $620,000. A life-changing amount of money, sure, but nothing that would make headlines. But here's where the story gets interesting. Jimmy didn't immediately cash out. He waited. He watched. And as the years went by, the value of Bitcoin exploded. By 2017, his stolen Bitcoin was worth over $500 million. By 2021, it peaked at over $3.3 billion. Zhong, a college kid from Georgia, was sitting on one of the largest cryptocurrency fortunes in the world. And nobody knew. So what do you do when you're secretly a billionaire, but you can't tell anyone? For Zhong, the answer was, be careful. Very, very careful. He bought a nice house in Athens. Nothing too extravagant that would draw attention. He lived comfortably, but not lavishly. He couldn't exactly roll up to a Ferrari dealership with $1 billion in Bitcoin and not raise questions. Because here's the thing about Bitcoin that Jimmy understood. It's not actually anonymous. Every transaction is recorded on a public ledger called the blockchain. Forever. Anyone can see it. Law enforcement had noticed the theft almost immediately. The Silk Road administrators reported it. The FBI opened an investigation. They could see exactly where the stolen Bitcoin was. They could watch it move from wallet to wallet. But they couldn't see who controlled those wallets. For years, federal investigators watched and waited. They saw Jimmy move small amounts through cryptocurrency mixers, services designed to obscure the origin of Bitcoin. They saw him carefully, slowly, convert tiny fractions into cash. It was like watching a ghost. They could see the money moving, but they couldn't see the person moving it. Jimmy had become paranoid. He stored most of his Bitcoin on devices that were never connected to the internet, what's called cold storage. He hid them around his house, in safes, in floorboards, even in a popcorn tin. He had over $660,000 in physical cash hidden in his home. Precious metals. And those Bitcoins, worth billions, sitting on devices scattered throughout his house like Easter eggs. For 7 years, Jimmy Zhong lived this double life. Normal guy by day, secret billionaire by night. March 13, 2019. Emergency dispatch in Athens, Georgia received a frantic call. Jimmy Zhong reported that his home had been burglarized. Someone had broken in and stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of Bitcoin and cash. When police arrived, Jimmy's story seemed believable. He showed them the broken window, the disturbed safes. He filed a report, and the officers left. But Jimmy had just made a fatal mistake. Because theft reports get filed. They get reviewed. And when someone reports losing hundreds of thousands of dollars in cryptocurrency, federal investigators take notice. The IRS Criminal Investigation Unit got involved. So, did the FBI. They started asking questions. Who was this guy? Where did he get so much cryptocurrency? They started digging into Jimmy's background, his financial records, his digital footprint, and slowly, piece by piece, they began to connect the dots. That Bitcoin Jimmy reported stolen? Some of it could be traced back to suspicious transactions. Transactions that looked an awful lot like the ones from the Silk Road heist 7 years earlier. In November 2021, federal agents executed a search warrant on Jimmy Zhong's home. What they found was beyond anything they expected. Hidden throughout the house, they discovered the mother lode. Bitcoin wallets containing over 50,000 Bitcoins. At the time of seizure, this was worth approximately $3.36 billion. They found $660,000 in cash, neatly bundled and hidden. Precious metals worth thousands. And perhaps most bizarrely, they found 25 Cassius coins, physical Bitcoin tokens that are now collector's items. One of these coins was hidden inside a popcorn tin buried in a bathroom floor. But here's what's truly remarkable. Jimmy didn't fight it. He didn't lawyer up and claim innocence. He cooperated. Completely. He admitted to everything. He walked investigators through exactly how he'd done it. He even voluntarily surrendered additional Bitcoin that the government hadn't found yet.
Why?
Maybe he was tired of living the lie. Maybe he knew he was caught and wanted leniency. Or maybe, after 7 years of paranoia and secrecy, he was just relieved it was finally over. On November 4, 2022, Jimmy Zhong pleaded guilty to wire fraud in federal court. The prosecution laid out the entire scheme. How he'd exploited Silk Road's vulnerability. How he'd hidden the Bitcoin for nearly a decade. How the value had grown from hundreds of thousands to billions. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. In April 2023, Jimmy Zhong was sentenced to just 1 year and 1 day in federal prison. 1 year. For stealing $3 billion. How is that possible? How does someone steal billions and get less time than people get for drug possession? The answer lies in cooperation and timing. Jimmy fully cooperated with authorities. He helped them understand cryptocurrency crimes. He turned over everything. And crucially, the government got back almost all of the stolen Bitcoin, worth more at recovery than at theft. His lawyer also argued that Jimmy was young when he committed the crime, just 22 years old. He had no prior criminal record. And he'd been living in fear for nearly a decade, which was its own kind of prison. But there's another factor that's important to understand. Silk Road itself was a criminal enterprise. The Bitcoin Jimmy stole? It came from illegal drug sales, money laundering, and other crimes. He stole from criminals. Does that make it okay? Absolutely not. But it complicated the case in interesting ways. Meanwhile, Ross Ulbricht, the creator of Silk Road, the dread Pirate Roberts, is serving life in prison without parole. He was convicted in 2015 on multiple charges including money laundering, computer hacking, and conspiracy to traffic narcotics. The irony is striking. The man who created the criminal marketplace got life. The man who stole from it got 1 year. So what does this story teach us? First, that Bitcoin isn't as anonymous as people think. The blockchain remembers everything. Every transaction is permanent, public, and traceable. Jimmy thought he could hide behind the technology, but that same technology is what ultimately exposed him. Second, that law enforcement has gotten very, very good at tracking cryptocurrency. What seemed impossible in 2012 became routine by 2021. The tools, the expertise, the international cooperation, it's all there now. And third, that in the world of cryptocurrency crime, the amounts are getting larger, but so are the consequences. Since Jimmy's case, we've seen even bigger heists. In 2022, another couple, Ilya Lichtenstein and Heather Morgan, were arrested for laundering $4.5 billion in Bitcoin stolen from the Bitfinex exchange. As cryptocurrency becomes more mainstream, these crimes will only increase. But so will the ability to solve them. Jimmy Zhong was released from prison in 2024. He's now in his early 30s, his once billion-dollar fortune seized by the government. He can't profit from his story. There are laws against that. He's back in Athens, Georgia, where it all started. Living a normal life. No longer a secret billionaire. No longer paranoid about being discovered. Just a man who, for one brief moment in history, pulled off one of the largest heists ever, and then spent 7 years living in fear of being caught. In the end, the blockchain doesn't forget. The ledger never lies. And sometimes, the hardest part of stealing $1 billion isn't the theft itself. It's living with it. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of cryptocurrency's most fascinating crimes, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more true crime stories. What do you think? Was Jimmy's 1-year sentence fair? Or did he get off too easy? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.